This is the Humans of Gaming podcast, an open and honest conversation about games, life, and belief.
Hello and welcome to Humans of Gaming. I'm Drew Dixon. I am the Chief Content Nerd of Love Thy Nerd, and I'm joined as always with Chris Waltney.
Hey, I'm Chris. I'm the Chief Executive Nerd for Love Thy Nerd. Drew, you didn't say your title.
I did. I said,
did you?
Chief Content Nerd. I think.
I'll be honest, I was spacing out.
Yeah. See, I have a backup here.
Just done this so much. We should switch it up one time. Like, I don't know. We'll just change our titles. We are recording this on April Fool's Day, so.
That is true. I should have said something. Well, it wouldn't make sense for when this releases, though.
That's true. But then that would be the true April Fools of it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I feel like we should mix it up just to fool people. Like, do April Fools on the 3rd or something, you know?
I mean, that is kind of interesting that, like, a day about pranking people is the same day every year. So
Yeah.
you know to be looking out for pranks.
April Fools, we changed April Fool's Day.
Right?
It's a pretty good joke. I feel like
Yeah.
it's already funny.
All right.
I didn't even do a prank yet. No, well, not exactly.
Next year.
So we're joined by Eddy Webb. Hey, Eddie, how are you?
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Hey, Eddie.
Doing good. How was you guys' weekend? Did you have a good weekend?
For me, yeah, it was great. I actually had a friend of mine came into town to visit, and we were talking about board games and video games and getting caught up and just like what's cool out there. So that's always fun.
Yeah. Plenty of that to talk about.
Are you a big board gamer?
Yeah, I'm getting more and more into it. Lately, I've been getting a lot more into cooperative games.
Okay. Nice.
What are your go-to co-op games?
I definitely like Sentinels of the Multiverse. It's kind of like a big
Eddie, you just made a fast friend. Oh my man, I have
actually backed the big
everything.
Kickstarter that had like the you're fighting the big like 100,000.
Oblivion.
Oblivion does it, yeah.
Yeah, that's the only one I don't have. I have everything else.
Oh, it's the scenario is ludicrous. It's just like it's like you have to get like $20,000 and then it's card flips.
Yeah,
20,000 points of health.
I played. They play tested it. Sorry, Drew, you're just going to be alienated here for a minute.
That's okay. I played it once.
Yeah, I play tested Oblivion like, gosh, it was probably 2 or 3 years ago
really?
at Gen Con. They were play testing it, and it was even worse then. Like. I don't know how many play tests they ran over the course of the weekend, and I think 2 groups actually like beat it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it was so ludicrous, and like I think the groups that did beat it took them like 4 hours or something crazy.
Oh yeah.
But I really enjoy the digital version. I don't know if you've played that.
Yeah.
This may be heresy, but I actually think the digital version's better because it automates all the housekeeping stuff you have to do.
I can totally see that. I like both for different reasons. Like the housekeeping, I don't mind, especially if there's lots of people involved, because then there's a kind of, oh, hey, remember you got to add this and I should add that. I mean, it can be irritating, but also it adds to the strategy and the feeling you're part of a team because you can help each other out with those kind of bits. But you're right. If I just want to like kind of play more of the puzzle of the game, as it were, and it's like I want to see how this deck works against that villain, then the digital version is way better.
Mm-hmm. Well, this isn't the Sentinels podcast, but
it can be.
My one bit of feedback about Sentinels is that I think I played it once or twice, maybe just once, but that was something I remembered as feeling like I had to do a lot of math.
Yeah,
and I played it at a time. This is common with me, as I'll get into LA to visit Chris or whatever.
Sleepy Drew.
And it'll be really like with the time difference. It'll be really late, and then we'll play a game, and I'd fall asleep.
Yeah.
So I don't think I fell asleep in Sentinels, but I do remember feeling like I was too tired.
I think I need to start. I'm not on Instagram, but I think I should start an Instagram of just pictures of Drew sleeping while playing games with me. Because I think I could have a lot of content.
Yeah.
This is Drew falling asleep during Arkham Horror. This is Drew falling asleep.
Actually, he has fallen asleep playing Arkham Horror. It's funny you should mention that.
Yeah. That's literally happened.
Yeah. Oh
And it's
my
not
gosh.
like if any of the developers of these games are listening, it's not like a slight on those games. It's just a problem that
He's
it's like
just a
personal
sleepy
problem.
guy. He's a sleepy
Yeah.
boy.
Yeah.
What other co-op games? We kind of rabbit trailed on Sentinels.
No, that's fair. The problem is there's so many I'm blanking on it now. Actually, Hogwarts Battle.
Oh yeah,
Harry Potter
that's
one?
the
Yeah, that's a good
one and only game my wife actually would ask me to play. She's not really into games, but that she's super into Harry Potter, and that game was just like the sweet
helps.
spot where she would like. I didn't have to beg her like, oh, play a game with me, play a game with me. Like she would say, hey, when are we going to play the next one? Like,
Who's her go-to character?
she played as Ron. I played
Harry.
as. I think I played as Harry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that game is hard too. Like the first couple of years, you're going, "Oh, I got this. This game's pretty straightforward." And you get to year 3, and it's like, "Yeah, you don't know nothing."
Oh yeah. That's kind of like the books too, right? Like the first 2 books, you're like, oh, this is whimsical and whatever, and then it's like, oh, the world's gonna end. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Then you get around year
heavy.
5, and it's just like we're all going to die horribly, which is exactly like books,
This is probably like says something about my parenting, and people will probably judge me for this, but I'm reading Harry Potter with my 7-year-old, and like we just keep plowing through them, So I'm like, I don't. A lot of people have said like you should wait to read some of the later books till your kids get a little older, But I don't know. She's just enjoying it so much. Like we just kept going. So we're in book 6, and I'm like, man, this is heavy stuff. Like, we're starting to get into Horcruxes and.
Dude.
How old are your kids?
So I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 1.5-year-old. But it's really just my 7-year-old that we're reading Harry Potter together.
That's fair.
And actually, her sister is in the room with us when we read, but I don't think she really pays attention, So like, she's technically listening to it too, but I don't think it's registering with her.
Yeah, see,
she's usually like playing dolls or Legos while we're reading. So
totally, yeah. I just learned from experience that I think kids can handle that stuff a lot more than sometimes we give them credit for.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
there's a great quote from Neil Gaiman. This is for his book Coraline, where he says that the book might be a bit scary for adults, but it's just right for kids.
That's great. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
Neil.
It's really important. Like, it's become important to me to like find. Because there's so much like, I don't mean like moral garbage, but just garbage that's like sort of weightless for kids, like kids programming.
Oh yeah.
Like I'm trying to think of some examples. Like
it's not very deep.
The Barbie, any of the Barbie
We get it.
animated series are like, they don't have any substance to them.
Yeah.
So like it's become really important to me to find like shows that we can watch together and things that like have real heroic moments and people dealing with real family, dynamic issues and things like that that are handled responsibly,
Yeah, totally. And I think like shows like on Netflix, Dragon Prince is a really good example of that.
Yeah, Mike, we've loved that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a show that's pitched for kids, but I mean, there's some depth happening there. Characters are dead.
In season 2, yeah.
Yeah, totally. I don't want to mention which characters because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But
yeah.
I love it.
Have you seen? I just blanked on it. Ronya, the Robber's Daughter.
No, I haven't.
So that's on Amazon. It's Goro Miyazaki, which is like Hideo Miyazaki's son, I believe, who did a lot of like the Studio Ghibli films.
Okay, right.
Yeah. So anyway, it's his son that made it, but it's it's just, I love the way it deals with like sort of, it's a fantastical sort of fantasy series, but it handles like relationships and kids and the emotions of children in a really rad way, I think.
Nice.
So anyway, commercial for that over. Eddy, tell us about Pugmire and the work that you do.
Let me just kind of start with the second half there.
Sure.
I'm a writer and a game designer, but I have been since around 2002. A lot of my work has been in tabletop role-playing games. It's kind of where I started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And actually, my first project I worked on professionally was a game called Cartoon Action Hour, interestingly enough. It was a game about emulating 80s style cartoon / toy commercials. So it's your He-Man, G.I. Joe, Transformers kind of thing, but without any of the branding, because there's no way we can afford it as well.
Right.
And so from there, I started working on just anything I can get freelance work. So I was doing a lot of freelance work, and I got the privilege to work on things like the Red Dwarf tabletop role-playing game and the World Wrestling Entertainment tabletop role-playing game. And you get to really understand how licenses work. Around 2007, I got the opportunity to work at a company called White Wolf Publishing. I did a
White Wolf Publishing. Is that what you said?
White Wolf Publishing, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I worked on a project for them. They really liked my work. And there was a full-time job opening. At the time, I lived in St. Louis, but they wanted me to move to Atlanta to take the job. And so I talked to my family about it. We agreed. We all packed up, moved to Georgia. And then around that time, they had merged with a video game company called TCP. It does EVE Online.
Heard of it.
I worked on tabletop stuff there, but I also started getting heavily involved in video game stuff. And my familiarity with licenses really helped me kind of talk to like the legal team there, because we were wanting to license stuff out. And so these kinds of things that I know I've worked on the other side of it's like, and if we talk to these partners, the kinds of things we need, and so on and so forth. So I actually moved over into the late lamented World Darkness MMO, which got canceled 5 years later. Me and my wife were laid off, and so
you're not like you don't have like true street cred as a game designer until you've worked like for years on a project that gets canceled by the publisher.
Yeah,
so
totally.
Rite of passage.
So you earned your stripes, man.
and it's actually worse because that was my first. I mean, I did some work on EVE Online, but most of my work had been on this one project, and I couldn't show anybody anything. So I was trying to find work, and it's like, hey, so I worked on this game you never saw, and that's it.
It was
for
going to be
5
awesome.
years. It would have been great. Also, with all proprietary information, so I can't share any of it.
Right.
So when I realized that was going to be a no starter, I actually went into started working for myself. I formed a company called Pugs, and I realized that I had been working a lot of time on other people's properties, so I want to start making one of my own. Yeah, and that leads into Pugmire.
So I'm guessing all this is rooted in like a love for pugs.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. We have now owns in our lives we've owned 3 pugs. We've fostered a 4th.
That's cool.
And my family just really loved them. And right around the time that I was trying to think of something I could do, a property I could make my own. I was in a temporary apartment. We were there for a couple of weeks, and it was just an old ice house that had been converted into apartments. So just open plan concrete.
When you say an old ice house, what is that?
Like a place where they actually used to store ice before they shipped it out to people, before they had refrigeration.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that you would just have just a big concrete place to just keep ice cool.
Yeah.
And so you have 2 dogs that are going crazy, and so they're barking, and then the sound reflects back to them, and they hear, oh, there's a dog, so I have to bark at them again. So that lasted about 20 minutes before I was okay, we're done.
Like the definition of an echo chamber.
Right, exactly. So we actually got things like, we're going to go outside, we're going to walk. And I started just kind of trying to keep myself occupied, as my dogs are entertaining themselves. And watching their personalities, and I started mapping it to old like kind of Dungeons and Dragons templates. It's like, oh well, Puck here is kind of like the bard because everyone loves him, and he goes very adventurous and goes off and tries things. And Murray is kind of the wizard because he sits back and watches things and very careful. And then I was like, there's something here. So I started actually working on some fiction, and eventually became a tabletop role-playing game. And Pugmire now is the kind of result of that, and that's basically it's set far in our future. So it's actually set on Earth, but it's set long after humanity is gone. And so dogs have been left behind, and cats and a couple other species have been left behind to kind of reclaim the Earth. So it's kind of Lord of the Rings meets Planet of the Apes, but with dogs.
That's great. Yeah.
And one of the things that I realized as I was writing that is I wanted to use it to explore the relationship we have with our pets. So for the Pugmire, which is the dog, there's also Monarchies of Mao, which is the cat version of the game. But for the dog version of the game,
what is the cat version again?
Monarchies of Mao.
Okay, gotcha.
Because there are like 6 different city states that are kind of trying to work together and come together as a nation. Cats are very kind of independent and prickly.
Just making sure you didn't say monarchies of meow.
No, it's not. Although the gag is actually Mao is the earliest known breed of cat.
Okay.
It's Egyptian cats, and they were named after the sound they made.
So
basically, the joke is like, what are you? Meow. All right, sure, that sounds good. That's what you are. You're Mao.
That's fun.
But so I want to figure out where humanity came in, and when you look at how dogs treat people, I mean, both if you live with dogs, but also just kind of like meme-wise, you see people talking about dogs. They kind of whole "Are you a good dog?" vibe. They look to humanity for that, and like that's an awful lot like religion, So there's a church of man. There's a church of the old ones. And the reason why the dogs and the cats don't get along is because dogs look to humanity and say, you give us guidance, you tell us whether we're good dogs. And cats look at humanity and go, you worshipped us and you did cool things for us, so we value you as past servants to us. So the cats are the cats put themselves above humanity, and the dogs don't take that well, and that's why dogs and cats actually don't get along.
Oh, interesting. That sounds like pretty accurate to the Cat Dog Rivalry.
Right.
And also kind of, makes me think about how people relate to cats and dogs too,
right.
Like there's a lot of, cat lovers will claim that like they're more independent, and dog lovers will claim that they're like, or cat lovers will say of dog lovers, you just need attention and that kind of stuff. So
my favorite thing is when cat people will try to sell how cool their cat is, and they'll say, "Oh, they act just like a dog." And I'm like, "Cool, like why don't you just get a dog? Because all dogs act like dogs."
Right.
Yeah. Then you're like sure to get a dog like a dog.
A dog.
It'll act like a dog if you get a dog.
Right.
So if that's what you're going for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was the thing, is that I wanted to actually use the game and to large the world to kind of explore that a bit more. And also, like all kind of good animal stories, I think, is that it's also really an allegory about ourselves. I mean, if you look at, anything ancient like Aesop's fables, all the way to more modern things like the graphic novel Mouse, or even things like Mouse Guard, a lot of it is really us using animal traits as a way to explore our strengths and weaknesses and to talk about ourselves as people. So it's definitely a way to kind of explore things like, okay, well, we as people understand the cat-dog rivalry, so that's a way to actually explore things like xenophobia and racial tensions in a very positive way that, even kids can possibly understand. It's like, oh, of course I hate them because of cats. Like, okay, but is it okay to hate cats just because they're cats?
Right.
Oh, well, maybe not. So it allows you to explore those things in a very safe environment.
Yeah, I think there's really something in that when you can kind of do that in a fantasy setting. Like you said, it makes it safe, and it creates a little distance. You can remove some of the like emotional response from it and look at it maybe more objectively.
Yeah, and also allows me to explore, on brand for this podcast, it allows me to explore some religious topics to people who aren't normally keen on those. Because if I take real world religion on the topic, say, okay, but as a dog, you're supposed to be a good dog. And what does that mean? I've seen people spend like 30 minutes or an hour arguing in character about what constitutes a good dog, because they're using their real world kind of knowledge of what we see dogs do, and then they start to realize, oh, we're having a religious debate.
Yeah. Well, and it's like you're kind of alluding to is there's just some triggers for people, like people, because I think in what we do with Love Thy Nerd and in our experience is like there's just a lot of hurt. The church. I mean, we're obviously coming from like Christianity kind of perspective, and there's just been so much hurt and harm done by Christians to people that aren't. And so the minute you say any of those kinds of words, God or Jesus or church, or it's like the walls are up and the hurt is on. Yeah. But I think like what you're saying is you create a safer place for people to talk about that stuff and explore that stuff, and without, dying inside or something.
Yeah. And also, I mean, like, it allowed me to kind of give people a chance to explore different elements. One of the things, it's meant to be kind of a throwaway reference, but the dogs, every 4 or 5 times a day, they have the call to walk. The bells ring and they go out and they walk around because man told them that 3 to 4 times a day you have to go out and go walkies. But a Muslim friend of mine is like, oh my God, that's a call to prayer. It's like, yeah, absolutely. That's the whole
that's funny.
point. It's a reference to it, but in a way that people go, oh, I get how that works for dogs. Yeah. It's a small step to start thinking about this new concept that maybe you wouldn't normally be exposed to.
Yeah, and you talked about some of like the dealing with some of the tensions between people of different races, or perhaps people of different religions, even, and things like that. Have you heard feedback from players that have interacted with that meaningfully? What are some stories? What's like a good story maybe of someone who's like picked up on some of that and impacted them?
So like my kind of there's 2 small anecdotes. The first one, when we were first playtesting it, I hadn't really dug into all of the stuff I just mentioned. It was more like, okay, it's a fun fantasy game with dogs. But the way I design worlds and the way I design games is I try to find depth, but I also know that sometimes obviously putting a depth in looks contrived. It's like, here's the moral lesson you're going to hear today. It's like, it doesn't land well.
Right.
So sometimes I just put the pieces together and see what comes out of it.
Christians never do that.
Right. Yeah. So it was a very early playtest, and I went to a convention that it was predominantly a live action convention. There's a lot of people who are playing Vampire the Masquerade as a live action thing. So these are people who are used to playing characters that are kind of Machiavellian and manipulative and dark. It's like, hey, come play my stupid dog game. They're like, sure, no problem, Eddie. And so I started playing it. I was expecting it to be kind of I would say fairly traditional Dungeons & Dragons experience where you're playing glorified mercenaries that kill characters and take their stuff and move on. I had designed it so that was not incentivized, but I wanted to, without telling them what the tone was, I wanted to see what naturally came out. And one of the characters was a shepherd of Bam. And so I was like, well, your characters shows the other dogs that they're supposed to be good dogs. And the player was like, okay, cool, we do that. And so they started really leaning into it. It's like, you should be a good dog, stop being a good dog. And the other players started listening. And they started actually acting like a team because they did not want to be called a bad dog. And these are people who, again, have said horrible things in the portrayal of their characters in this kind of dark horror setting, but like, I don't want to be a bad dog. And that's when the whole be a good dog thing was like, originally it was one of the tenets of the Church of Man that I bumped it up to number 1. I'm like, okay, this is the catchphrase of the game functionally. Side note, the catchphrase for Monarchies of Mao is, but be an excellent cat. So, in case you're curious.
Sounds about right.
All right. So once I kind of realized this, I did some more playtesting. I was later on this test cycle. And I had written a scenario where I wanted to kind of dig into the moral complexities without being obvious about it. So the scenario, there's a lot of other moving parts, but the key piece of the scenario was that there was a character named Alistair who had a cat valet. And the cat valets, had come from the monarchies, but had lived in Pugmire for, most of his life. He came over as a kitten, found his and works for this dog and is happy in that relationship. He's not abused. Alistair's just kind of dim. He really relies on his valet because he's a wizard, focused on wizard things. And it's like, okay, we should actually maybe eat and get dressed. So they have kind of very kind of a Jeeves and Wooster style relationship. And so the cat gets arrested for reasons that upon investigation ultimately amount to because he's a cat and look vaguely suspicious. And so the character's trashed by Alistair. Could you go off and I as a noble, I can't be seen going against the police. So can you go off and find evidence and bring it back so I can have my valet released? And so, okay, cool. So go off and have an adventure and they bring the evidence back and the cat's released. And the players are talking afterwards. One player pulls me aside. Can I ask you a question? I'm like, sure. I'm thinking, where can I buy the book? I have a question about the school. And they're like, was that a game about racial profiling? And it's like, yes, it was. So, I mean, and since then I've had other people really gravitate to that. But again, because I don't pitch it that way. There are also lots of people who are just like, I want to play a Weimaraner with a battle axe. And it's like, great, have fun. And I've run for like families, and I've found that generally kind of just say, get together, play for a few hours kind of scenario. The adults are like, oh yeah, there's a lot of depth and texture. And the kids going, when can I attack him again? And they just don't care. But it's great because they're both having fun in very different ways. So, and that's why I think that's exciting about it. And again, a lot of it was I just discovered that as I was running it, as I was building it, it was something I kind of built in. So the fact that people are picking up on it is really heartening because I love that aspect of the game.
Yeah. So the different like breeds of dogs have different traits and things like that, different skills.
So basically, from a mechanical level, there are 7 different categories of breeds. They were initially very loosely based on the AKC stuff. So there's runners, there's workers, there's companions, and then over time I realized that wasn't working, and I've actually talked to some dog, not psychologists, people who study dog drive and why dogs act the way they are. And so I adjust them around. So basically, it's whichever one of those 6 categories makes sense for the breed you want to play, just slot them in. Is really what it comes down to, because I want people to have flexibility. Because I didn't want to get into endless arguments of, well, you didn't mention the German Shepherds and they should have been in this group and you had them in that. I don't want to get into that. But then also 7th category is mutts. There's this, you can kind of mix and match a little bit more and
build your own.
None of these quite fit what I want, so here's a 7th category. We can kind of mix and match it to make it what you want. But in the world, each of the dog breeds is kind of a family, and I intentionally made it very muddy and messy because human genealogy is very muddy and messy. There are a lot of hounds. And so like if you have wolfhound, I have it as wolf-hound. So it's like a hyphenated family name. So like there's the wolf family and the hound family. And at some point they became the wolf-hounds. And so there's lots and lots of hound branch families. And so there's stuff in the history about how the hounds were contenders for the rulers of Pugmire, never quite made it. So they moved off and formed another kingdom called Houndton. And, how do the corgis fit into this? Well, the corgis maybe are here or over here. It's meant to kind of emulate the difficulties in, like, say, a British or German or French noble tradition of how the families intersect and approach each other and marry and intermarry and whatnot. So it's meant to be kind of a glorious mess. So you can fit yourself in there anywhere that you think makes sense.
I like that.
But if you want to have a faster dog, then you could pick the faster dog category and put your dog in there. If you want the stronger dog, you make the stronger dog category and put them in there. So it gives people a chance, flexibility. But I gave some examples as well. So like the pugs are naturally the charismatic family because, they're so cute, I'll do anything you say.
That's biased.
Right. Exactly. But I mean, I've seen
they're
people
always
around,
snorting,
so.
Isn't it? Don't pugs always kind of like snort?
Oh yeah, snorting and sneezing and
like
farting.
little piglets.
Kind of wheezy.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's like they walk 5 steps. Cool, I'm done. That's it.
That's like me. So you mentioned this a couple times, just about this intersection of like religion and kind of your fascination with that in this context. But you had told us when we were emailing about coming on the show that you actually spoke at a couple classes like about this intersection of like religion and pop culture stuff.
Yeah.
What was that about? Like, how'd that come about?
So prior to Pugmire, when I was still at White Wolf, there was a point in time where I was what's called the line developer, basically the creative lead for a game called Vampire the Masquerade. And in the Vampire the Masquerade mythos, they believe that all vampires are descended from Cain. But he was the first murderer, and so vampires are all
Cain and Abel. Yeah,
exactly. So it's really, really, really hard to talk about Vampire the Masquerade without talking about Judeo-Christian myth, and that was intentional by the design. I didn't make that design. I inherited that property around 20 years it's been around. But I recognized that was a big, strong piece of it. Like there's a very prominent mechanic called humanity in Vampire the Masquerade, and as you perform sins against humanity, that humanity decreases, and if you lose all of your humanity, you become a ravening monster and you're no longer a playable character. So there's a very clear indication of that. And one of the people on our demo team, people that we asked, fans to get together and actually run games for us at conventions, he was a religion teacher. And I actually said, would you be interested in talking to my class about this? And so I've done it a couple of times now. And because I find it very fascinating that games have a chance to explore and talk about religion, but also in a lot of ways they're very bad at it. And the reason why,
Amen.
I'm sure you have a lot of opinions on that. But for me, the problem a lot of times is that the people of faith fall into one of two categories. The well duh category. It's like, I believe in gods because that God is right over there and gives me this exact stat bonus to do a thing. So of course I believe in God because I could directly either interact with God or God gives me a direct benefit. So why would I not believe in God?
Right.
The other category is you're an idiot, which is that the game explicitly tells you there is no faith. And so people of faith are therefore stupid because we as the audience recognize that they don't believe in anything. And I feel like the middle ground is actually not often explored in games. Because usually faith a lot of times has a buff or a stat modifier. Or it's just a throwaway component. It's like, they have faith, in the same way it's like, oh, their hair is brown. It's part of the bio and that's all that happens.
Right.
And horror games in particular are pretty bad about this. There are not very many characters of faith in horror fiction that are something you want to emulate.
Right.
So it's something that bothered me, even though I'm agnostic myself. I would see a lot of my friends with faith not seeing themselves in the game. And I feel very strongly about inclusivity in design. And there's a lot of conversations that happen around things like bringing people different sexualities into these kinds of games, or bringing people different races in these kinds of games and different faiths in these games. But the concept of faith alone is actually one of the areas that we aren't good at. So when we did
it seems like that's when it gets uncomfortable for people, like when religion or faith is like a concept, or we just sort of acknowledge that there's people with faith out there in the world or whatever. That's something that I think we can handle. But I think sometimes when it's like, no, you're dealing with people who actually believe like spiritual things about being true in the world, people start getting like uncomfortable, like, so I'm curious of how you, because I think that's important for us to like be able to have conversations about these things and maybe get a little uncomfortable and like acknowledge that we're uncomfortable about it. So I'm curious of like how you bridge that gap.
So for me, one of the things I did, like there was I guess that's described as a spin-off called Vampire the Requiem. It was kind of a reboot of the world and it takes a different direction. And again, I wasn't involved in the design of that, but one of the pieces I helped develop was they had a similar faith. Theirs stemmed from Longinus, the first soldier to stab Christ. And in Vampire the Masquerade, Cain was whether Cain existed or not was kind of nebulous, but he had vampiric childer, and they caused the clans to be created. So it was pretty clear. Okay, there's probably something there. But with Requiem, it was a little muddier, and I had the chance to actually make the in-worlds book of faith, the Testament of Longinus. So it's kind of a fake vampire Bible. And I'm realizing as I'm saying this on this podcast, it's going to sound really awkward to some people, but
oh, it's just what I've always wanted.
Right. So I actually hired a theological scholar and a person of faith to write on that book. And I said, I want this to actually feel like a theological debate. So one of the things we did in that book that we haven't done in previous books was there's actually footnotes as the two compilers are coming at it from wildly different perspectives. One person's coming from much more kind of conservative, what was written actually literally happened, and the person's coming from it as a kind of, this is actually much more meant to be allegorical. We brought in a lot of historical research around the times that we were alluding to. And the ultimate goal was, I wanted people to end the book and go, you could have 2 different opinions or 4 different opinions or 100 different opinions of what was said and all theoretically be true. By making that concept both concrete and not definitive, it allows people to explore that gray area. It's okay, faith is faith. People have faith in this universe. So that is just, you can't debate that. There's an entire group of vampires that all believe something about this. But the specifics of what they believe, they all completely disagree on. And so they can say, okay, I have this power that I call a miracle that allows me to do a thing that other vampires can't do. That comes from my faith, but it doesn't necessarily directly come from Longinus or God or whatever. Each character can interpret where that source comes from. And there are actually agnostic vampires in that group. It's like, okay, I believe this power comes from myself. I believe the power of my faith in these concepts is what powers me. I don't think it comes from an external entity. And that's also a valid approach. So it's something that Pugmire weirdly doesn't do very well, because we as the audience all know that we didn't empower dogs to shoot magic missile. I mean, I know that I didn't do that. I was at that meeting. So we know that that's not true, but I tried to make sure that inside the worlds, no character can actually answer that question. No character can definitively say, well, humanity isn't doing this. And I try to muddy those waters in the fiction as much as possible. But with vampires, I was able to actually muddy the water between, because there's in real worlds, faith is a basis. I had to muddy the water between the players and the characters as well.
I think that's really good. That's a simple way to say that.
I like your stuff.
I think people in general need to be more comfortable with gray areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say Christians especially, but maybe even all faith groups. I mean, I can only kind of speak from the Christian perspective, but that's something that makes people so uncomfortable because it's so not defined. And I mean, that's what our brains are wired to do, right? Like make sense and order out of things that don't have sense and order.
Right. But the nice thing about game design, though, is that the book says, okay, faith exists and there's benefit for being for faith, but why? That's up to you to decide. And so for some groups, they're going to enjoy that and say, okay, let's dig into this, talk about that and have that debate. And players wants to go, no, I just know that my faith is this, and the game is not contradicting me. So I can still see myself in that space.
Right.
So the muddiness also works from a player perspective, people who don't want to have a muddied perspective. They don't want to look at the gray areas. But because it's the topic is gray, they can see their definitive view inside of that gray space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I do want to make sure we talk about a little bit about kind of you and your background and all that kind of stuff. So you said you're from St. Louis originally? Is that where you grew up?
I'm actually originally from Northern Ohio.
Okay.
Hey, Midwest, my man.
Yeah. I grew up in a city called Lorain, Ohio. It's about an hour-ish west of Cleveland. And it was
I'm guessing small town.
Well, no, it was actually it was a steel town. It actually has a big Ford plant there. But then the steel dried up about 50 years ago, and the town's been kind of in a pretty steady decline ever since. So it's a bit like it's a smaller version of Detroit in a lot of ways.
Dude, you are literally describing my hometown as well. And I often describe my hometown as a smaller Detroit.
Where are you from?
So it's called Anderson, Indiana.
Okay.
But same thing, like lots of industrial plants and stuff that all, closed down and laid off thousands of people. And it's just a depressing place at this point.
Yeah, it's the same thing. And on top of it, Lorain is right on Lake Erie, and also there's a river, the Lorain River. And so it was a big shipping area, and that dried up. But because it's kind of close to Cleveland, some of the Cleveland money has made its way somewhat out here. So you have this weird dichotomy of it's now basically really cheap lands. So there's this one road called Lake Avenue, right on the lake. And the north side, which is around the lake, you see $1 million mansions. And then on the other side of the street, you'll see dilapidated, abandoned buildings.
Mm-hmm.
It's a stark difference. And frankly, I think that grew up in that environment really gave me an appreciation for horror. And also, I also read a lot of noir style fiction. That kind of stark haves and have nots really shaped my viewpoint in life.
So what did your parents do growing up?
My dad worked he was a car manufacturer. I mean, he worked on the construction line at Ford. My mom was a barmaid. They got a divorce, so my dad went off and remarried. I had a couple of stepdads. My first stepdad also worked in kind of a body shop. So, again, automotive strong trend. Yeah. I actually don't know my dad's faith. I know he's Christian, but I never inquired into the specifics of it. My mom was Catholic.
Okay.
But it was kind of
were they both like practicing or
no. So my mom was Irish Catholic, and she was kind of told that she was going to become Catholic, and it's something that she resented. So when she became adult, she really kind of lapsed. And when I grew up, she wanted to make sure that I didn't have that experience. So she gave me the choice that when I was of age, I could make an informed decision, and she would support whatever beliefs I wanted.
But she took you to church before that?
Yeah. I went to a couple of churches. I also went to a few masses as well. But that was part of my, just more of an exploration. She said, it's like, if you want to stop going, and of course I'm like, you're 10, like going, hey, I want to go take up half of my weekends and sit around and let somebody else talk. That sounds great. I bailed on that. But I did appreciate her making the effort and I chance to explore. And also, like when I was a kid, a couple times I went to like Bible school during the summer. So I mean, I certainly felt like I got my exposure to it all. But I just realized it kind of wasn't for me. But also during time,
I remember going to Bible school as a kid, and I remember hating it.
It was not good.
Like it just felt like it was boring. Like the crafts to me were not fun. There was a lot of like, hey, quit being loud and sit down and do that, And I just remember going 2 or 3 times and hating it. But like my kids, they would go to every vacation Bible school that is offered by every church in town if we let them. They love it. I think it's in part because they're different than me, but also in part because Vacation Bible School has evolved over the years.
Dude, that's a spectacle. Oh, man.
Yeah, I visited some of the Vacation Bible Schools that they've gone to, and it's like a party, man.
Some of those places rival freaking Disneyland.
Yeah, it's like they know how to let kids have fun. So I guess that's good.
Yeah, no, I went in the 80s when it was terrible.
yeah, that's when I went in the 80s and early 90s, and it was not. I did not enjoy it. No.
But I mean, it was for me. I was always kind of vaguely interested. I was like, I felt like I believed in something, right? It's like, but I wasn't sure what it was.
Yeah.
And so like I explored paganism for a while. I explored Taoism for a while. And ultimately, at the end, I'm not.
When you say explore, like you're reading about them.
Reading about them. Went to groups. I identified as pagan for like about a year. Had pagan friends. And then I read up on Taoism. I'm like, oh, that's totally what I am. And then like I'm not, because I don't have the cultural background to actually be that.
I think like I'd be curious to hear you share a little bit about your experience with paganism, just because I think like a lot of Christians hear that and go like, oh, it was like witchcraft, or like they get like that sounds scary to them and weird, and they don't understand it. So I'd be curious, what was that like?
So no, it actually funny, like the weirder things was actually just stuff like playing with my vampire LARP friends. My actual the pagan groups I was involved, especially in Northern Ohio, it was just mostly like a lot of New Age style of paganism.
Okay.
So very much steeped from the kind of 60s and 70s counterculture. A lot of hippies, a lot of repurposed and recontextualized Eastern philosophy. I did actually have a friend who was an actual like Satanist, and we didn't get along, not because he was a jerk, but just like I told him, I was like, so you're basically just a Christian. And he's like, no, I'm saying this. Like, you believe in the same stuff, just backwards. I don't want you to understand. I didn't even get it, And then I've sent
it's like cat people saying their cat's cool because it's like a dog.
Right? Yeah, it's like I've since actually met some people who are genuinely like interesting, well thought out Satanists, and it's a misnomer. Like, it's kind of like an inherited term. It's like they don't even believe in Satan. It's a whole separate thing, and I don't understand completely, so I'm not going to go into it. But
sure,
with paganism, it's kind of just a lot of times it's just a band for and everything else. So I met a ton of people who had a wide variety of faiths, but it kind of got all lumped into paganism. But I mean, in my experience, it was just like very chill. There wasn't a desire to convert nearly. It was just more like, what do you believe? And I was like, I don't know. It's like, cool, here's some options. What do you like? Oh, I kind of like that one. Cool, let's talk more about that. And the kinds of people I generally gravitated to, which more of the kind of English and Irish based kind of druidic and those kind of nature worship elements. But then I realized that wasn't satisfying me either, and so I just went to my friends like going, hey, I just want to hang out, but I don't think I'm into this anymore. And they're like, all right, cool, and we go back to playing Marvel superheroes or talking about movies or whatever. I mean, like my wife, she actually worked at a pagan bookstore for a while, And basically she complained more about the bookstore side of it than the actual like religious side of it. It's just working in a bookstore just happened to be a very specialized topic. So I could see why maybe people who haven't experienced it might seem scary because it's something other. It's something that you have no experience with. It can be frightening. But in my experience, it was mostly just a bunch of people sitting around drinking beer and talking about things that they thought were important. But just like any other group of people having faith going around to talk about things that we think are important. So yeah, I mean, at the end, the past 20 years, I've really just kind of settled on I'm agnostic. I don't really, I believe that there's something out there. I just don't have any kind of way to articulate it. And also I feel like, really, I just got to settle on being a good person, and different faiths have different good ideas on what that means. And so I kind of pick and choose from a lot of different philosophies and belief systems and go, okay, I think in aggregate, this is kind of what contextualizes what I consider to be a good person.
Just trying to be a good boy.
Exactly. Trying to be a good dog. And so, yeah, and it's funny because it was something that it was like a year after the game had been done before I looked at went, oh yeah, that's me. I didn't even see myself in there until like long after it was done.
Yeah.
But the same thing is like it's all the dogs have this mixed up perspective of what humanity really was, and they kind of jam all together in a way that makes sense for them. It's like that's kind of how my faith evolved.
Yeah,
so
I sense that in like. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I'm curious. Like, it's very clear. I mean, just the short time I've been talking to you, like, you definitely have an interest and a fascination or thoughtfulness about like religions and faiths and those kind of things. And I'm always curious, like, where that begins or like how that starts. And I'm sure it's not like, oh, there was this one aha moment. But I mean, do you kind of attribute that to your mom, like kind of encouraging you to, hey, find what works for you? Or was there like other things that happened in your upbringing? Or what do you think kind of, I don't know, grew that?
So, this is an awkward question, but not for the obvious reasons, because I want to have a really cool, this is the moment where it all happened. It makes sense to me. And it sounds really exciting and inspiring, but reality is Transformers comics.
Oh, great.
Because
I think that'll probably resonate better with our audience than anything else because it's nerdy.
Because during the Marvel comics, I'm a huge Transformers fan. Like I have all the new comics. I have a couple of the toys. I love the Transformers media specifically. And during the later part of the Marvel run, the writer Simon Furman introduced the concept of Primus, which was the god of Transformers. And at the time, it just was like a thunderbolt to me because I'm like, even machines can theoretically worship somebody. And of course, in true cartoon style, he turns out to be evil, and there's a whole thing, and it's not good. He's the rival of Unicron. Unicron is the devil, and Primus is God. And it doesn't go well, but the concept still kind of stuck with me. And from then, I realized that popular culture is really the mythology for modern day. Because ancient Greeks, they told stories about the gods, and that's how they learned parables, and that's how they learned what's culturally accepted of them is through these stories of the gods. The Bible works in a very similar fashion. All the different stories in the Bible give us certain perspectives on what we believe should be good or bad. In a lot of ways, superheroes and comic books and video games and whatnot can do something similar. And I hadn't really pinged on faith being the key piece. It's more the larger component of the stories we tell each other tells us who we are. And in modern day, that is done through all these different media. But when I started working on Vampire the Masquerade, I had to start learning about Judeo-Christian myths specifically, because like I'm going to start name dropping people. I should know what the heck who they are and what the context is. And the stuff I vaguely remember from Vacation Bible School is not going to cut it. So I actually picked up,
especially 80s Vacation.
Right, no, not good.
Yuck.
Jesus is a skater guy. I think that happened. Yeah, that's sort of accurate. My friends, who's a person of faith, she recommended to me the Oxford Bible, which I still have a copy of because while I didn't find faith in there for myself, reading it, I said, okay, I could see why people find this interesting, why they find this inspirational, and just learning a lot about. I had heard some of the stories, but understanding the context now of the stories from a historical perspective and from an anthropological perspective. I was like, oh, I could see why this story stuck around. I could see why people found, a value. In particular, the story of Job kept coming up in my research a lot. And it was a good metaphor for a lot of stuff I was playing with in a horror game. Is the kind of the test of faith is a pretty strong component. And so I actually kept kind of referencing that story a little bit. Certain characters would reference that story because it's a shortcut to explain, okay, well, in a universe that we're not entirely sure if faith truly exists, this character still has faith in spite of that I could see people really gravitating, and they did. A lot of players told me, that was really cool to reference that because I saw myself in that. But I personally try to take a step back from specific faiths as much as possible, because I think that if done well, people can also see the chance for them as coming out in their sexuality, as people who come around to faith as a result of it. Like one person at a convention came up to me and said that by reading up on Vampire the Masquerade, they actually embraced their Jewish faith, which they had resented from their family. It's like, they really pushed it on them.
Interesting.
And they're like, okay,
that's not the story you hear on Fox News,
right? Yeah, but it's like, hey, this thing about horrible blood-sucking vampires made me realize that there's a need for some kind of faith in the world, and so they kind of to re-examine their Jewish faith and became a very strong proponent of it. So I think horror, a lot of times, if you give that gray area, people can start making decisions for themselves because they see not only potentially themselves, a darker version of themselves in the stories, but also they see the world around them and be concerned about it. So I mean, it was that relationship that resonated with me. It was that having that dialogue as a game designer, because with fiction you can do that, with movies and TV you can do that, but with games you're putting yourself into it. Whether it's a video game on the couch or a tabletop role-playing game or even a board game, you're actively taking an action based on the material presented to you. So you start to become emotionally invested in that, and it allows you to emotionally explore topics in a different way than just consuming media.
Yeah. And it seems like, to me, like you mentioned earlier, you have this desire to be a good dog. And it seems like, to the way you design games, there's like I don't know if it's like a moral backbone, if that's the right term, but at least like you feel responsible to create games that make people think about the world.
Yes.
In a way that's like responsible and mindful of our neighbors. But that doesn't come from necessarily like a faith background for you. It's like, what drives you to do that, to create things that have kind of a morality, or at least a sense of responsibility for how we interact with our neighbors, that kind of thing?
Honestly, it's a combination of my mom and my friends. My mom, she grew up on a U.S. Air Force base in England, so she had dual citizenship, so she had both American and British upbringing, particularly English upbringing. And so that kind of balance of the English dichotomy of the need to make sure you don't make waves and make sure everyone is comfortable and happy, but then that kind of American component of, but if you go too far, I will do something about it. So I kind of grew up with that mix. It's like I grew up on this heady stew of Doctor Who and Star Trek, where it's like we could talk about things until we can't anymore, and then I have to use photon torpedoes. So I mean, and then seeing my friends, and then I have a lot of friends in different subcultures, and so seeing them marginalized or attacked, even I mean, I grew up again late 80s, early 90s. I was heavily involved in the punk subculture when I was a teenager and a young kid, skater punk particularly. But a lot of people talk about now, white supremacists just popped up in 2017. It's like, no, they've been around for a long time. And I got into some fights with them, and I lost a lot of fights with them, to be fair. I was not a good fighter. I did not become a writer because of my amazing physical skills, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But I felt a need to stand up. It's like, what you're saying and what you're doing is objectively wrong. And I disagree with you, and I will not allow my friends to get hurt by people like you, whether it's by your rhetoric or by direct action. So really a lot more of it for me, I think, came from the punk subculture of the, I also had friends who were, I don't know if you're familiar with straight edge punk culture.
Yeah.
But they're basically no drugs, no sex, They're the antithesis to a lot of the hedonistic punk subcultures.
Okay, interesting. I didn't know
Yeah. No. If you see people with X's on the backs of their hands, that's usually an indication of straight edge.
Yeah. And it's not from like a Christian or religious thing either.
No, although there is actually a straight edge spinoff that does specifically, they are Christians. And I'm
Tooth and Nail Records.
blanking on the name of them right now. But they have they have the cross with the letters around it. Anyway, punk subculture is another thing I just read a lot about. But my friends at the time, it's very much I have a strong belief that I don't want to have poisons in my body. I have a strong belief that, people of color should be allowed to exist. These kinds of people I want to hang out with. And so it's like, yeah, I want to protect them. And then I realized after a period of time of that being a part of my makeup, that the act of having faith was also something that a lot of people were weirdly intolerant of. Like you say, there's been a lot of damage done. And so I can understand why specific people having specific concerns about specific sects or specific acts may be problematic. But at the same time, there are people who are like, I had atheists in my culture. They're like going, well, the fact that you believe someone is stupid and wrong. And it's like, that might work for you. But, how is it that you could be so tolerant of all these other options, but then this is where you draw the line?
Right.
Right.
And it's like, and the reality is like all things, there's nuance and there's complexity here. It's nothing is that simple. But I felt very strongly, it's like, if you're not hurting anyone, and if your beliefs don't hurt anyone, if your actions don't hurt anyone, you should be able to do what you need to do. So again, a lot comes that kind of like that kind of combination of weird punk subculture and that kind of just Midwest upbringing of just be a nice person. Don't be a jerk.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. This has been great. I have one last kind of question for you because I think this is relevant to a lot of our listeners. One of the things that we try to do with Love Thy Nerd is educate people about the value of things in nerd culture. It's like recently we've been doing this series of articles on the site called like why board games matter and why what was the other one?
Well, we did
why comics matter.
Yeah, why comics matter, why Dungeons and Dragons matter. I mean, tabletop role playing in general, but
yeah. So I'd be curious to hear like, how would you answer that question? Why do tabletop role playing games matter? Why should people give them a shot? As someone who makes those types of games, like what value do those bring to the lives of people who play?
I think there's two big components. The one that's probably arguably more important is that it is very good escapism. It allows you to just put yourself into a fantasy or a fictional environment and just have a good time with friends in generally in a short environment, safe space, and you can just have fun. And I think the value of escapism as an end goal is something we as society are largely walking away from. And I find that sad. It's that, you can just have fun with a thing and that doesn't have to be a deeper meaning for it. The fact that you had a good time is in and of itself is a perfectly valuable reward. But that being said, I do think that tabletop role-playing games allow you to put yourself into somebody else's shoes in a way that very few other art mediums allow. It allowed me to explore elements of myself and of other people around me and understand them. And sometimes that's scary and frightening, I'll be honest. But if you have a group of people around you that you trust and respect and are willing to listen to you, and as long as you're willing to have open conversation about when your personal boundaries are getting pushed too hard, I think it allows you to actually sit down at the table, go into that liminal space, if you will, and actually try to be somebody else for a while, knowing that you can set it down and walk away. Allows you to have empathy for others in a way that no other media can really get close to yet.
Yeah, that's good. And I think also maybe explore yourself too. Explore your own worldview or your own perceptions of things in a way that I think a lot of other games don't give us really that option to do that. Or a lot of I shouldn't say games. A lot of other media that we consume doesn't.
And actually, I do want to quickly name drop. There's a fantastic group called the Bodhana Group, Bodhana, and they are licensed therapists who are exploring using tabletop role-playing games for therapeutic use.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
We'll
Yeah.
check it out.
Yeah,
we just had the Game to Grow guys on. Do you know?
No, I've heard of them.
Adam Johns and Adam Evis.
That sounds right. Yeah, we just call them the Adams.
They just launched a Kickstarter for kind of that does some of that
Nice.
as well.
Well, it's called Critical Core, and for the Kickstarter, it's very specifically tailored towards helping people on the autism spectrum.
Nice.
And helping develop like social skills and all those different kinds of things, because they've been doing that stuff. They're based in Seattle.
Okay.
And they've been using D&D and different role-playing systems to do that kind of stuff for years. So
That's fantastic.
I think the Kickstarter's probably still going.
Yeah, I'll check that out. And I think that stuff is great. Like one woman came to me on Facebook, and she mentioned that her autistic son has been using Pugmire to help him out because he really loves the book. And so when he needs to go out and do something that's uncomfortable for him, he puts on his mental kind of good dog face. He's like, okay, I need to go pretend to be my dog now to be a good dog in this space. And it really helps him with social cues and in uncomfortable situations. Yep. And that I cried. I mean, I was just like, oh my God, that is so wonderful to realize that something I made was that much of an impact on someone's life.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
They told a really cool story. They were the two Adams. They were in a session, and one of them was DMing, and the other one I think was either playing or just kind of facilitating or whatever. But one of the kids they were playing with has autism, and he wanted to do something. As his character wanted to do something, and he said, "Hey, I want to do this," and the DM was like, "Yeah, sorry, it didn't work." And you could see in this kid, like, the pressure was rising. Like, he was just starting to escalate to a point where it was like gonna just boil over. And the other Adam that was kind of facilitating, like, he leaned over to him and he's like, yeah, that's really frustrating for your character, isn't it? Like, what's your character doing? Or how does your character respond to that? And they said immediately they saw like the temperature just drop and like the red go out of his face, because he was able to kind of disassociate and get some distance and think about it more in terms of his character and how his character would respond, and be able to kind of, safely explore what those responses would be and stuff. And that's just killer. Yeah. Like, especially for people that, have some hindrances or whatever in dealing with those kinds of things. I mean, let's be honest, all of us do.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, that's just, man, that's it.
That's wonderful. And that's why I think you're right. If you ask me what's the value of tabletop role-playing games, is that things like that can happen. Right. And that these possibilities, and it's so low tech. It's just a conversation and some dice and paper, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. That's cool, man. Well, where can people find you online?
So people can find me on Twitter at Eddy Fate, EDDYFATE. That's also the name of my website. If they want to check me on Facebook, I'm Eddy Webb Writer. And then if you want to check out my professional stuff, you can go to any social media site as Pugsteady, PUGSTEADY. And for Pugmire specifically, I have all my Pugmire stuff at realmsofpugmire.com.
And that's cool. Pugmire.
Yes, as in a dog stuck in a swamp.
Yep.
Great. Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm DrewDixon82. Chris is not on Twitter, but he is on Facebook. Look him up, Chris Gwaltney. Follow Love Thy Nerd on all the social medias. Just search for Love Thy Nerd. When you search for us on Facebook, you're going to like Love Thy Nerd, and then also ask to join our Facebook community. If you want to hang out online, get to know some other nerds who are into nerdy stuff, go to our Love Thy Nerd community on Facebook and hang out and introduce yourself. I think that's about it. We have a whole other podcast network, or we're part of a whole podcast network with 2 other podcasts, so be sure to go check those out, rate and review them. There's the Free Play podcast, which gets into all areas of nerd culture and is super entertaining to listen to. And then we also have The Pull List, which is a comic book podcast. So go check those out. Would you please consider rating and reviewing Kingdoms of Gaming on iTunes? It would mean a great deal to us. It's going to take 2 minutes out of your day, and it's a very simple way you can give back to Love Thy Nerd.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it for us here. Thanks again, Eddie. This was awesome.
Thanks, man.